Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Pratik and I'll be taking up the news today discussion for 29th May. So in the main news, the first news that we are going to cover is about the social crisis of dowry deaths in India. The second news is about the judicial pendency in India. Third news is about India's declining fertility rate. And in the fourth news, we'll be covering Chandrayaan-2 has found possible subsurface ice near the moon's south pole. And in the last news, we'll be covering growing stem cells in the space. Then we also have quick updates. So let us start with the very first news, that is about the social crisis of dowry deaths in India. And this news has become important because of the recent NCRB data that has been released for the year 2024. And according to the data, the number of dowry deaths every day in India is 16. So every day, nearly 16 women has died due to dowry-related violence as revealed by this particular database. So in this particular topic, we will be covering the legal definition, understanding of dowry in India, and what exactly is leading to such kind of atrocities against women, and what are the preventive mechanism in this regard. Okay. So let us first take a look into the legal definition of dowry as provided under the Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961. So under the act, it is mentioned that dowry means any property or valuable security given or agreed to be given either directly or indirectly by one party to a marriage to the other party to the marriage. So it doesn't indicate whether it will be given from the bride side or the groom side. If any of the party either gives a gift or agrees to give a gift, that would be accounted for in the form of dowry. The second thing is by the parents of either party or to a marriage or by any other person. So it is not just limited to the parents, but also to any other relatives like uncles, grandparents, etc. To either party, to the marriage or any other person at or before or any time after the marriage. So earlier, it was only before the marriage that dowry was considered, but then Supreme Court in a very important judgment in 2006, I think it was Satwinder versus State of Punjab, in which Supreme Court said that even after the marriage, if a substantial property is exchanged, that would be amounting to dowry, right? If there's a coercive measure attached to it. So in connection, except it does not include dower or mahr in case of persons to whom the Muslim personal law Shariat applies. So except this, all such matters would come across or would be counted as part of dowry. So as you can see, the definition of dowry under this act is very inclusive, and it covers all the aspects. The next thing is, what exactly does the data NCRB talks about? So if you look at the current status as per the NCRB 2024 data, it talks about the crimes against women, where of the 4,41,000 cases, 27.2%, that is around more than 1/4 cases, have been registered under cruelty by husband or relatives, right? And then the other part is that dowry deaths has been given, like India has recorded around 5,737 dowry deaths in 2024. Now, in this case, you should also understand the concept of predicate offense. So NCRB, in its statistical framework, what it does, it always registers the crime which is of the higher nature. For example, if there is murder along with dowry harassment, then the crime will be considered under murder, right? So this is the concept of predicate offense. So in a way, the number that we see here could be underrepresented as well, okay? Then in terms of the regional variation, UP is the state which has reported the highest number of cases, which is around 2,038, followed by Bihar. In fact, UP and Bihar together amount to half of the dowry cases or dowry deaths in India. And thirdly, it is Madhya Pradesh. Next, let's talk about the reasons why dowry cases are seeing, why we're seeing a rise in the dowry cases. See, the number one reason why dowry cases are still relevant or prevalent in India is because of the social acceptance. Because we have the social acceptance in the form of the fact that there is social status attached to it. So there is one reason. The second reason is the poor conviction rate. So the conviction under the Dowry Prohibition Act is less than 1/3. So first thing is why we are seeing an increase in dowry cases. Number one has to be social acceptance. And also because dowry giving is also seen as a form of social status as well. So social acceptance, it is form of a social status. Then the very limited conviction rate. If you look at the conviction rate under the dowry prohibition rate, it is around 34%. Then also dowry is seen as a quid pro quo, right? Essentially it is seen as a trade-off where the parents, in a way to prevent themselves from providing for inheritance to the daughter, utilize dowry as a way to not pay them inheritance, right? Sometimes this is one of the social practices that is being done. So these are some of the reasons why we see increase in dowry cases. Now, what interventions has the government taken? So here we can take three large measure or three step frameworks we can understand. The first thing is that we can understand is the legal intervention. The second one would be the institutional framework or institutional measures. And the third one would be the judicial intervention. So in terms of the legal intervention, the first and foremost, the most important one is the Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961. So it criminalizes the act of giving, taking, or demanding dowry, right? So this provides for not less than 5 years of jail. Plus it also provides for DPOs, that is dowry prohibition officers, that are supposed to be appointed by the state government. And they are supposed to play a more preventive role in terms of ensuring that dowry is not undertaken during marriages, right? The second important development or legal measure that has been taken is Section 304B of IPC. Now this has now been subsumed, or this has now been translated into Section 80 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. And essentially what it says is that any death that happens after marriage, and especially within 7 years of marriage, and it is suspected to be under the case of dowry, right? That would be registered as a dowry death, right? So this was essentially again because of judicial intervention that this provision was included. Then you also have IPC section 498A, earlier section, which has now been made section 85 of BNS. This provide for, or this addresses cruelty by husband or the relatives of the husband, right? And here this accounts for all the form of cruelty, mental cruelty, physical cruelty, etc. And also with respect to dowry harassment. Then we have a civil remedy, which is the Dowry Domestic Violence Prevention of Women from Domestic Violence Act. So it provides civil remedy to protect women from domestic violence. Residential right, financial right, etc. is provided through this. And then you also have the section 118 of the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam, that is section 113B of the Indian Evidence Act, that raises a presumption of guilt against the accused. So in a way, the presumption is made to be guilty. And as a safeguard, Supreme Court also has provided this judgment in Arnesh Kumar, where the police have to apply their mind before ensuring that they are arresting those who are guilty of domestic violence. Okay, so in a way, you can see that we have a very robust mechanism, legal mechanism, in terms of ensuring that dowry cases are prohibited. The second important measure that second set of measures that we have taken in terms of prohibition of dowry cases is institutional measures. And under the institutional measures, we have the National Commission of Women, we also have the dowry prohibition officers, etc. And lastly, we have the judicial measures. And interestingly, here we need to understand the directives given by Supreme Court very recently in the State of UP versus Ajmal Beg case. Now, this is a very important case where Supreme Court held that dowry is not just an individual crime, but it is a social evil. And therefore, we require a multi-dimensional approach to prevent dowry cases from happening in India, right? And Supreme Court had suggested a slew of measures, a multi-dimensional approach to prevent dowry cases in India. So first, it has suggested appointment of dowry prohibition officers under the Dowry Prohibition Act in a way that they understand and ensure that they are not overburdened, they are properly trained, they understand their requirement and the duties really well. So just because this act has provisions for appointment of DPOs doesn't mean they get appointed. So Supreme Court has made this very clear that DPOs have to be appointed. Secondly, they have also suggested or directed training of officials, especially the police officer and the judicial officer, to periodically receive training, especially in terms of sensitivity training and the legal training. Thirdly, expeditious disposal of the pending cases. Here, the high courts have been requested to take stock of the number of cases that are pending, especially for the dowry related cases. And then apart from that, the Supreme Court has also suggested to provide for awareness programs by district administration, change in education curriculum for awareness. So ultimately, to sum up, what we can say is that dowry, since it is a social evil, it cannot merely be eradicated by legal means. It has to be, we have to take a multi-dimensional approach. In fact, one of the measures that is suggested is 4P approach. That is prevention, punishment, prohibition, and promotion. So first is that we need to be taking preventive measure. We need not wait for the crime to take place. So definitely one has to be very proactive towards this. Second is punishment. If the crime has been committed, then punishment should be very steep, very fast. Thirdly, prohibition in terms of dowry, all these related matters, and ensuring the promotion of women empowerment. So these are the 4P approach that we can mention when it comes to preventing the dowry related deaths and other cases. Now from this topic, UPSC did not ask a very direct question, but UPSC keeps asking questions related to women empowerment or the challenges that women face across space and time. And this particular question, explain why suicide among young women is increasing in India. So they have asked especially with respect to young women, right? So here you can talk about the dowry deaths, you can give example from NCRB, and then you can highlight how dowry remains one of the major causes of suicide for women, right? Next topic is about addressing judicial pendency in India. And this became in news because recently the President promulgated an ordinance under Article 123 to increase the Supreme Court judges from the existing 34 to 38 in the wake of increasing case of pendency. And this Supreme Court number of judges amendment ordinance was passed, and it will be tabled once the House starts meeting, right? So here we need to understand the whole idea behind the judicial pendency, and what exactly is the status and what can be done to address this. So when it comes to the current status, according to the National Judicial Data Grid, the number of pending cases in the Supreme Court is around 93,000, okay, including 22 5 judges, 5 7 judge, and 2 9 judge, right? then constitution bench matters. All these things, so we have this current thing. So this is what is our current status as far as Supreme Court is concerned. So we have these many cases that are pending, plus this is the number of our benches. When it comes to the subordinate courts, this crisis deepens at the grassroots. High courts carry over 6.4 million pending cases, while the district courts are burdened with approximately 49 million. So this will indicate that the rot comes at the bottom, because there is huge pendency at the subordinate level. Next, why exactly do we have pendency? So the question could be, discuss the reasons for the pendency of cases in India. And the other part could be that, do you think that just merely appointment of Supreme Court judges will increase the pendency cases, or will ensure that the pendency can be addressed, right? So for this, we need to understand the nature of pendency in our country, and to what extent appointment or mere appointment of judges will address this problem. So when it comes to the pendency, first is that merely increasing judicial number does not sustainably reduce the caseload, as the complexity of the cases also rise. So understand this fact that cases in India essentially are becoming more and more complex. People are becoming more right conscious, and the ability of the people to also approach the cases through NGOs or through using other means of remedies is also increasing. And because of that, the complexity is also increasing. So this is one way. And the number of the judges in the initial stage were only 7 during independence, which has now increased to 38. So if you look at the number, the judge population ratio, we have just 21 judges per million people in India against the recommended 50 judges per million. So we have definitely shortage of judges. So this is definitely true, and therefore we must try to bring it to this level. The second thing is that there is dilution of core mandate. So in a way, we also understand that Supreme Court in India is supposed to play a very transformative role, right? In terms of the Constitution did not envisage a very passive Supreme Court. It envisaged Supreme Court to be the guarantor of fundamental rights, to be the defender of the Constitution, etc. So in a way, if you look at the mandate of Supreme Court, it is not just limited to the constitutional cases, but it is also as the final authority for appeals, right? So it also acts as the final authority for appeals. So it interprets the constitutional cases. It is the final authority for appeals. Then it also takes into a consideration several other cases through special leave petition under Article 136. Plus there is also Article 142, under which Supreme Court has been given the power to pass any order or decree to do complete justice, right? So Supreme Court has this power to do complete justice in any matter, and all its wording, just think, it has been given a word of law, or it is to be treated as a law in the entire territory, right, of the country. So if you look at the mandate, so Supreme Court is not merely a court for constitutional cases. So Supreme Court routinely admits a number of special leave petition under Article 136. Now it has transformed the Supreme Court into a high volume appellate, right? So if you look at the Supreme Court of United States, it does not take too many cases. It only takes cases which is supposed to be taken by it only, right? So therefore in India, the mandate is already very huge, and on top of that, Supreme Court also takes up many additional role. And this perhaps can also be, some of the scholars call this as judicial activism, and some other call it judicial overreach. When it comes to the financial constraint, you also see that India spends only 0.1% of GDP on judiciary. Now this directly impacts the administrative efficiency of the case management, etc. So this leads to systemic bottlenecks where procedural delays at the admission level, at the at the infrastructure, and staff shortages, they also lead to poor case management as well. Then government is the largest litigant, right? It is responsible for around 50% of the litigation, right? So most of the cases you will see that it will be against Union of India or against some state, etc. So these are the cases why there are pendency. On top of that, there are other reasons why pendency has been rising. It is because of during the COVID time, judiciary did not meet in the physical mode, and because of that, many of the pending cases have now made its way to the Supreme Court now. So again, this is also one of the reasons why pending cases are increasing, apart from the fact that people are becoming more rights conscious. Then Article 21 has been extended significantly. In fact, recently Supreme Court has said that right to getting trauma or certain care during trauma is also part of Article 21. So Supreme Court is significantly expanding the domain of rights under Article 21. So in a way, we can see that there are significant pulls and pressures. That is why the pendency, Supreme Court is taking up more than what it can chew. Right? So what can be done in this regard? What are the government initiatives? See, one of the things that can be done is through alternate dispute resolution mechanisms, where disputes can be settled outside the regular court, and this will reduce the burden through lok adalats, mediation, arbitration, etc. The second approach can be with respect to National Mission for Justice Delivery and legal reforms, which will lead to reduction of arrears and delays. Then centrally sponsored schemes for development of infrastructure for judiciary, especially given the fact that our spending on judiciary or as per the GDP is only 0.1%. So definitely some specific measures need to be taken. Plus, appointment of ad hoc judges, e-courts mission mode project, etc. can be done. In fact, Law Commission of India has also suggested that we also need to have some sort of regional courts, regional benches of Supreme Court that can ensure that the cases at certain areas can be resolved there itself. For example, it has suggested that we should have 4 benches of Supreme Court, right? So these are the mechanisms that we can ensure, that we can suggest, that would help in pendency of cases. Remember, appointment of number of Supreme Court judges will only be one way, but it will not solve all the problems. Okay. Next topic is about India's declining fertility rate. And this would be part of GS paper 2 social issues or GS paper 1 Indian society. And this has become very important because India's total fertility rate has now dropped to 1.9. 1.9, which is below the fertility total replacement rate, that is 2.1. So in a way, according to this recently released sample registration system SRS statistical report, this signals that India perhaps is moving towards a sort of declining fertility rate condition. So let us take a look into the key facts from the report, and there are a couple of concepts that you should understand, especially what exactly is total fertility rate, what is replacement rate. These are the data, the concepts that will keep coming up, especially with respect to the population or demographic reports. So total fertility rate basically means the average number of children a woman would have over the end of her reproductive period, which is considered from age 15 to the age 59 years, right? So average number of children. Now, what is replacement level? Replacement level essentially means that what would be the number of children that a woman must produce in order to replace the couple, right? The two people. So here the TFR is considered, or the replacement level is considered to be the TFR of 2.1 children. The 0.1 here is basically because of the infant mortality rate, IMR, the death that children get during birth, right? And if the TFR, that is the total fertility rate, is more than 2.1, it indicates a growing population, right? And if TFR is less than 2.1, it indicates a shrinking and aging population. So most of the countries in Africa, you will see that they have a TFR of 2.1, and countries, especially in the developed areas, developed countries, will be having a TFR of less than 2.1. In fact, Japan, Korea, etc., South Korea have a TFR of less than 2.1. In fact, Spain also have a very low TFR. Now, this is what is called as demographic winter. When your TFR shrinks below 2, then that is what is, you come under the condition of demographic winter. Now, in terms of the distribution of the TFR, in India, it is highest in Bihar, which is 2.9, and then in UP in 2.6, and MP 2.4. Then when it comes to the low TFR state, the least TFR is found in Delhi, which is just 1.2. In Kerala, it is 1.3. In Tamil Nadu, 1.3. So a pattern that you can notice here is that most of the northern state have a higher total fertility rate, and the southern state have a low fertility rate, right? Now, what exactly are the reasons for declining TFR in India? So it has both social and economic reasons. In terms of the social reason, there is increased women education. Because of increased women education, the marriage also gets delayed, and also because of the fact that women are part of the workforce, then the marriage gets delayed, and thereby the children also gets delayed. Secondly, it also because of the fact that now there is a migration is also happening, and because of the migration, the capacity of people to absorb the expenses is also reducing. So again, this is also giving or it is leading to declining TFR in India. Then, so family planning initiatives, especially in the southern states, have been successful because they have given a lot of impetus to control population, delayed marriage, etc. So these are some of the measures. In fact, now some of the states in India have started to promote the childbirth. Especially Andhra Pradesh government has provided financial incentive for third and fourth children. Okay, so this is the trend, right? Now, what is the implication of declining fertility rate? So there are both positive implication and negative implication. In fact, in India, the national population policy always had this objective to bring India's population within the replacement level. So the reason why this was wanted to do this is because it will lead to resource conservation. More population means more resources requirement, more agricultural produce, more housing, more everything, right? So if you have lesser population, you have lesser mouths to feed, you have lesser bodies to shelter, provide clothes, etc. So it will conserve the resources. In a way, it will be better for the environment. It will also improve educational efficiency. The teacher-student ratio can be improved. The education quality could be enhanced, and it would also lead to better employment status, etc. So these are the positive impacts that a declining fertility rate can provide. But what exactly are some of the negative impact? See, a declining fertility rate also enhances higher dependency ratio, which means that in this case, the population of the senior citizens will grow and the number of young population will be less. So in a way, they will have to be provided for by the younger population. So the dependency ratio, the proportion of the senior citizens will keep increasing here. Secondly, this will also lead to labor shortages because the share of the people who are in the working age will decline. And thirdly, it will lead to migration pressures because those areas, especially, and this is happening in India as well, in states like Kerala, in states like Tamil Nadu, they have labor shortages because the people, especially of younger age, are not present. So people from states of UP, Bihar, they are now coming to these states, and they are not. It is leading to migration pressure at both the states, right? So these are some of the negative impacts that you can mention. Now, from this topic, UPSC asked a question in 2024 that was, what is the concept of demographic winter? Is the world moving towards such a situation? Elaborate. So you have to use data. So first, we have already discussed the concept of demographic winter. Then you have to provide what exactly it is, how does it lead to demographic winter. You can talk about the reasons why TFR rates in India is falling, but this will be applicable to the world at large, right? Then you can talk about the trend overall. In fact, even in China, because of the One China policy, the TFR has declined. So in a way, China is also moving towards demographic winter. Then you can talk about some of the measures that the different countries are promoting to reverse this trend, right? Because of the negative implication. The fourth news is about Chandrayaan-2 finds possible subsurface ice near the moon's south pole. So this would be part of GS paper 3, Science and Technology. And researchers from the Physical Research Laboratory in Ahmedabad has made this discovery by analyzing data from Chandrayaan-2 orbiter's dual frequency synthetic aperture radar, that is DFSAR. So in very simple terms, what the news says is that Chandrayaan-2 has found this possibility of ice in certain areas of south pole of moon. So what exactly the research says, it has focused on doubly shadowed craters, especially the Faustini crater, small craters inside the larger permanently shadowed crater. So moon has certain axial tilt, and because of that axial tilt, there are certain regions in the moon which does not see sunshine for several years. In fact, several thousands of years it has not seen sunshine. So as a result of that, there are certain areas in moon which has ice crystals, right? They are permanently shadowed region, and these regions remain extremely cold, around minus 248.15 degrees Celsius or 25 Kelvin. Now key evidence that we got from here is the radar signatures and the rim morphology of craters, right? So this essentially was also shown through the report published by PIB. So lobate rim morphology refers to the crater rim that has a distinctive flow-like or lobed structure. So you can see it here, that this is the double crater and it has this kind of structure. But again, the science part is not important. What is important is you need to understand what is the significance of this, right? So first thing is that it provides us this kind of indication that that moon has resources which space agencies will able to utilize, and they will not need to take from Earth, right? So it can be used as a resource for various things such as drinking water, rocket fuel, which water to be split in hydrogen and oxygen. So moon can be a very important frontier, or from the base from which deep space exploration can be launched. Secondly, from the perspective of India, this has indicated that India is not just taking part in the lunar race. So as of now, you know that there is Artemis Accord, China has Changi initiative, etc. So India is not just taking part in the race, it already is producing critical data that could influence future lunar mission. It is in line with NASA-led Artemis Accord, and India has signed it, which calls for transparent data sharing, right? So this is the significance for the discovery that India has made. Okay. Now let's talk about something about Chandrayaan-2. So Chandrayaan-2 was launched in 2019 using GSLV Mk3M1 from Satish Dhawan Space Center, Sriharikota, Andhra Pradesh, and it has two major components, mission components, Vikram lander and Pragyan rover, and they were designed for a soft landing in South Polar region. However, communication was lost from the Vikram lander, but the rover continued to be there, and that is why we have received all the signals from the rover. Lander could not soft land. Payloads, it has 8 payloads on board. That is CHASE-2, that is the Chandra's Atmospheric Compositional Explorer 2, CHASE-2, which detected argon-40, a noble gas in lunar exosphere. Then other lunar missions by India, Chandrayaan-1, India's first lunar probe, launched in 2008, and Chandrayaan-3 was launched using LMV-3 in 2023, comprising the propulsion module, Vikram lander and Pragyan rover. It was made India first country to soft land near the lunar south pole, and only fourth to achieve a lunar soft landing. Again, all of these facts are very important, and a couple of years back UPSC asked a question on this as well. Next topic is about growing stem cells in space, and the astronauts in the International Space Station are continuing research to manufacture the large quantities of stem cells for therapies on Earth. So here what we need to understand is what exactly are stem cells, what are the different types of stem cells, and why it is important that the experiments that the scientists are doing in the space are relevant for us, right? Because in India, in the world or in the Earth, there is some sort of limitation, gravitational limitation with respect to the experimentation with the stem cells. So therefore, the microgravity that is provided by the space are providing the conducive environment for the stem cell research. So what about the news? So here the name of the investigation process is INSPA Stem Cell XH2 investigation. It aims to demonstrate large scale production of blood stem cells for pharmaceutical and clinical use. And because of the challenges of gravity, it was not very successful in India, sorry, in the world or in the earth. But the microgravity that is provided in the space station, that has helped in maintaining the stem cell quality during the expansion process, potentially increasing production efficiency and reducing the risk of rejection in patients. So put shortly, or in short, what it says that the space has provided the conducive environment because it has zero or very low gravity, microgravity. Okay, now let's understand what are stem cells. So you have root, and then from root you have stem. From stem anything can grow, right? So this is exactly the reason why they are called as stem cells. So they are foundational cells from where all the other specialized cells such as blood cells, brain cells and heart muscle cells are generated, right? Then they have the capacity for self renewal. They possess the unique ability to divide and create identical copies of themselves. So the entire life, they start from a single cell, and then the cell through various division creates an entire human body, and in entire human body there are trillions of cells, right? So there are specific cells which are called as stem cells, which have the capacity for self renewable. Okay, and they also have the capacity not just for self renewable but also for differentiation. So in a way they are like a blank canvas, you can draw anything on them and it will be functional. Okay, so they have the natural ability to transform into a variety of a specialized cell types that perform different functions throughout the body. So for example, if you have a stem cell, it can change into a blood cell or transform into a brain cell or into heart muscle cell. So it has the potential to transform into any of the different cells. Now we should understand the types of these stem cells. So on the basis of the source, it is divided into embryonic stem cells. So basically the embryos have the stem cells, then adult somatic stem cells, the stem cells that are found in the adults, and then induced pluripotent stem cells where the stem cells is induced, right? Then on the basis of differentiation potential, you have totipotent cells that is able to differentiate into all possible cell types. So that is totipotent, so it can differentiate into any kind of stem cells. Then you have pluripotent stem cells which can be differentiated into most tissues of the body but are unable to produce all the tissues. So they cannot produce all the tissues, but they can translate or differentiate into most of the body types, right? So what are the benefits of the stem cells? Now this is important from the perspective of mains. They can be used as treatment to blood diseases including leukemia or other hematopoietic cancer. So essentially during cancer, when this happens, the formation of the blood cells is disrupted, then the entire process can be improved using the stem cells. Then the second is for drug screening and development. In fact, stem cells are very useful for personalized medicine care, right? So it can generate specific human tissues for in vitro drug screening and toxicity testing. So it can be very useful for personalized medicine. It can also be useful for prevention of disease because it will help in understanding of disease by observing the growth of these cells into mature cells in bones, heart muscles, nerves, etc. So the whole transformation process will allow us to understand why it is not behaving in the way it is supposed to behave. So to summarize, what we can say is that it has direct application in cell-based therapies. It also has application in drug screening and drug development, and thirdly, to understand the diseases better, right? So these are the importance or benefits of stem cells. Let's now talk about the quick updates. And the first news is about hog deer. So recently, an albino hog deer was observed in Kaziranga National Park, which is located in Assam, and the Assam CM has also tweeted about it. And here we need to understand some of the details about this species. So first of all, this is an albino hog deer. So we should understand what is albinism. So albinism is a rare inherited genetic condition where the body produces little or no melanin. So melanin, if there is an absence of melanin, it will lead to white structure. Okay, the pigment responsible for color of skin, hair, etc. Because of no melanin, it leads to this kind of appearance. So now what about the hog deer? It gets its name from the hog-like manner when it runs in a very zigzag manner. So that is why it is called as hog deer. It is found across the Indo-Gangetic plains and the parts of South and Southeast Asia, including India, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. In terms of the conservation status, it is endangered under the IUCN status, and under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, it has been given Schedule 1 protection in India. Second, right to trauma care. So recently, Supreme Court in Save Life Foundation versus Union of India has recognized the right to trauma case as an integral part of right to life under Article 21. Remember earlier we were talking about the judicial pendencies, right? There are more than 93,000 cases pending in Supreme Court, and one of the reasons why this cases are pending is because Supreme Court takes upon itself a lot of other cases which it takes to promote the fundamental rights of the people, right? So here what Supreme Court has directed is to provide improving the trauma care, such as trauma care essentially does not just mean about the accident victims, but it also takes care of the people who have been a victim of disaster or any natural calamity, right? Including anything. So first thing is that there are very scattered helplines across the state. The helpline number could be 113, 112, etc. So what Supreme Court has said that there should be only one helpline, that is 112. Secondly, PM Rahat should be operationalized, which is a cashless treatment for all the accident victim. And thirdly, the establishment of Good Samaritan grievance redressal system, which means that those passengers or the passerbys who witness an accident and brings the victims to the hospital, they should not be harassed by the police. Why trauma cares matter? Because India annually records around 4.67 lakh accidental deaths every year according to the NCRB data, and nearly half of the road crash fatalities could be avoided with timely medical intervention. Now this is called as golden hour. If you provide care during the golden hour, then most of the cases can be prevented. The death cases can be prevented. Delay in emergency care contribute to at least 30% of trauma related deaths according to Niti Aayog. Next is about Global Annual to Decadal Climate Update 2026-2035 report. And according to this report, it says that years of exceptional global heat and climate extreme will come in the next 5 years. That is, in 2026 to 2030, it will be very warm. And what exactly it says? That 2026-2030 global temperatures will range from 1.3 degrees Celsius to 1.9 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level, and particularly the heat will be felt across the region that will be subjected to this temperature will be Arctic region, and a 91% probability exists of temperature exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius before 2030. So in a way, it goes against the mandate of the Paris Agreement, which did not want, which wanted nations to reduce the overall temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now this report is released by the World Meteorological Organization and produced by UK's Meteorological Office. Now some details about WMO. It is a specialized agency of the United Nations. Headquarters is in Geneva, Switzerland. The mandate is it's responsible for promoting international cooperation in meteorology, climatology, hydrology, and related geophysical sciences. It has 193 members, including 187 member states and 6 territories. Next news is about Kalai-2 and white-bellied heron. So you can see here this heron has white belly, white stomach. That is why it is called as white-bellied heron. And why it is in news? Because the Forest Advisory Committee, which works within the Environment Ministry, has provided or granted in principle clearance to a hydropower project, that is the Kalai 2 hydropower project, which has raised concerns because this area or this region is the territory of, or this is where these white-bellied heron are found. So Kalai 2 Hydel project is located in the Anjaw district of Arunachal Pradesh and under the Lohit river, which is a tributary of Brahmaputra. Now what about white-bellied heron? It also has other names such as imperial heron, great white-bellied heron. Current range, it is restricted to the southern foothills of eastern Himalayas, primarily across Bhutan, Northeast India, and within Northeast India, Assam and Arunachal Pradesh and northern Myanmar. So this is the location in which it is found. The global population is very small, perilously small, estimated to be less than 60 individuals. You can see the number here, it is less than 60. With the population in India being as low as 10 individual. Okay, so it has less than 10 that are found in India. Now, what is the conservation status? Of course, it will be critically endangered as per IUCN classification, and under the WPA status, it has been given Schedule 1 status. Next news is about nickel, and this is also making news because of the supply uncertainty from West Asia has raised concern about the availability of this metal. Okay, so what exactly should we know about nickel? It is, first of all, it is classified as a critical mineral by India, which means that it has high application and it has a strategic usage or application in India. It is lustrous silvery white metal with low thermal and electric conductivities. It doesn't occur in pure native state and is derived using Mond process. So Mond process, what exactly it is? It is also called as carbonyl process. It is used to refine the impure nickel into a highly pure metal through a unique two-step thermal and decomposition process. So it has thermal process and a decomposition process. And now what is exactly nickel used for? It is used for electric vehicles, stainless steel making, etc. And globally, Indonesia has the largest resources or reserves of nickel, that is around 42%, and production around 54%. In India, the entire demand is met through imports, yet we also have the reserves in Odisha, which is 93%, followed by Jharkhand, but it is not very economically viable for us to extract it as of now. Next news is about Lokayan 26. Now, Lokayan 26 essentially is about a 10-month, 22,000 nautical miles transoceanic expedition spanning 13 countries and 18 ports. Now, within Lokayan project, INS Sudarshini has arrived at Antigua and Barbuda, which is a Caribbean island under this project. So it was flagged off from the Southern Naval Command, Kochi, in January 2026. And the reason why this has been done is to showcase India's maritime prowess and essentially to promote the vision of Mahasagar, that is mutual and holistic security and growth for all in the region, right? So essentially it is basically, you can call it as a maritime diplomacy, that India wants to project its maritime power and to tell its story about what exactly is India doing in the Indo-Pacific or in the Indian Ocean region. With respect to INS Sudarshini, it is Indian Navy's second indigenously built sail training ship after the IS Tarangini, and it is built by Goa Shipyard Limited and based at Kochi. Again, see, such details can be asked as part of your prelims exam. Okay. Next is about National E-Governance Service Delivery Assessment, that is NESDA. This has been recently been launched by Department of Administrative Reform and Public Grievances. What exactly are some of the features of this? So It is based on a biennial assessment framework by DARPG. So India has pushed for the Digital India mission. It was launched in 2015, and more than a decade has passed. So India wants to assess to what extent the e-governance projects which are spread across the board, and we have different models of e-governance, including government to citizen, government to business. For example, in G2C, we have projects like the Umang portal, right? Then with we also have the DigiLocker, that are G2C portal, and then with respect to G2B, we have MCA 21, which is Ministry of Commerce, and where it provide the all the details here in a digital manner, right? So, and then we also have Khajane portal and this Lokvani, etc. So India has provided a lot of e-governance project, but this is essentially a feedback collection mechanism. It talks about, it checks the effectiveness of the e-governance project delivery from the citizens perspective, because most of these projects, they are being done, or they have been produced from the perspective of the service provider, but not from the perspective of the consumer. So this attempt is that the government will understand, will assess the framework based on online service index of the UN e-government survey, right? So in a way, this will provide the measure to the government to what extent they have been working effectively. So this is a very important component in improving the service experiences and in terms of good governance. Then Banni Grassland was also in news because NTPC's proposed solar project in the Banni Grassland threatens the fragile ecosystem, not just the ecosystem, but also the people who are living there, right? So in a way, this becomes very important. When it comes to Banni Grassland, it is located in the Kutch Grassland district of Gujarat. It is a unique salt-tolerant grassland ecosystem. It is Asia's largest tropical grassland, which has emerged from the sea due to tectonic activities. And it is inhabited by various nomadic pastoral communities such as Maldharis, Rabris, Mutawas, and Meghwals. Again, these tribal names are very important. In fact, UPSC has also asked a question on this. They strange light phenomena or chirbatti or ghost lights are observed here, where mysterious lights are observed on the flats after the sunset. So this is a phenomena that is associated with the Banni grassland. And Chari Dhand wetland in the grassland is designated as a Ramsar site in 2026. So this becomes very important. Next, International Security Forum, where recently our National Security Advisor Shri Ajit Doval has visited this area and he attended this first International Security Forum meeting in Russia, and he has also talked about the global terrorism and how this menace can be addressed, right? So we just need to understand some of the facts about ISF. So what exactly is the first ISF? It was held in Moscow under the Security Council of the Russian Federation. Participation, it had representatives from 120 countries including India. So India was represented by our National Security Advisor. Objective is to address the global security challenges, both the traditional and the non-traditional security threats. And this year it was the non-traditional security threats which found a lot of prominence. Again, there's a note that there is another ISF which was established as a not-profit organization in 26, that is under the patronage of the Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Poland. So do not get confused by this. Its primary focus via its annual summit is on transatlantic security cooperation and relation between Europe and North America, right? So this ISF was held, this meeting was held in Russia, and then there is another ISF which is organized by Poland, and that is for transatlantic and US friendship or cooperation. So this is all about today's news today. I hope this was useful. Thank you and all the best.